Desi Wade. Star 6 on you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I've spoken to the Planning Commission before about these ideas, and I'm really very pleased and grateful to all of the hard work that I know the planners have put into creating these ordinances and trying to come up with a framework that would allow what we've been advocating for almost 10 years now. That's a long time. The last two speakers, I want to reiterate the need for having more flexibility in the time frame. I have some questions seriously about if you start with 10 people or 15 people, and people are going to, for sometimes just be, that place will be a touchstone for them to go on and find something that's better or more stable. These are stabilizing opportunities for people. Some people are going to take longer than others, but as one moves on, how do you incorporate another and then give them the time that they need as your time is going away in the limitations? There needs to be more flexibility. If you really want to care for people, you have to take all these things into consideration. The other thing is, in terms of only having 10 sites, I have some concern about how is that going to happen for providers. Are the sites going to be, how are they going to be determined or selected? Is it going to be first come, first serve, who comes up with the first 10? And if that's all one provider or just a couple of providers, is there going to be some opportunity there or some way of creating or allowing for the opportunity to be opened up for people to get their ducks in a row, to be able to get through the permitting process and all of that? I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that we're here and we're having this conversation, because though we will only be able to do 150 people in one site, in 18 months, losing 3 people a month to the streets, we're going to lose 80 people. This is critical. And as the moratoriums end and more people become dislocated, and because of climate refugees, all the things that we've talked so much about, we are going to be impacted in a way that we really need to really start thinking of how we move people off the streets, give them opportunities because they need some choice, and we need to be able to be flexible enough to actually work together and collaborate to move people along into communities. And if we are not
30 seconds,
we aren't going to be able to do that. I really want to just say thank you. I know there's a lot of things to resolve. I would love the alternatives for being able to have churches be able to provide these, and for people to have, lots of alternatives as much as possible. So thank you. Thank you for all your hard work. Commissioners, I know you have heart. I see it in you in the decisions that you make and the discussions that you have.
Okay, your time's up.
Be flexible.
Thank you. Oh, now the hands are coming up. 7429, go ahead.
Good evening. This is Roby Tenorio. I'm also very grateful that something this important is before you. It sounds like there's details that need to be worked out, but we desperately need it. We need it very soon in Southern Humboldt, and thank you again for spending time on this tonight, and thank you to the staff for bringing this such an important issue forward. Good night.
Thank you. Next caller is Tony Girard. Okay, can we do that easy enough? So you'll have to promote to a panelist when you're asked.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, this is Tony Girard. I am the outreach coordinator for the Church of the Joyful Healer in McKinleyville. And I appreciate again, like everyone has said, all the work that has gone into this. The church has been doing outreach to the unhoused and food insecure in McKinleyville for almost 6 years. And I used to have a different heart when it came to unhoused people. I was very judgmental and not in my backyard. And I have changed because of my faith. and more importantly, my experience with uh, building relationships with these folks that are out on the street. And I am in strong support um, of these alternatives, of doing something different that has been done um, in the county, relaxing the regulations to make it easier to help the folks that the providers are so desperately trying to help. Um, I really appreciate the opportunity to give input, and again, I can't say strongly enough how much the Church of the Joyful Healer supports this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment and bring this back to the commission. We're at about 9:10, so okay, go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that came up in the written public testimony had to do with whether or not the parking lots had to be paved or not, and if they were unpaved parking lots, what that would mean in terms of tribes being able to comment on the potential for, you know, sacred sites being in those, you know, unofficial unpaved parking areas. And if it's just sort of a non-discretionary permit, how would the tribes have the opportunity to comment and point out those potential issues that come up? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thomas, you had your hand up as well. I don't. Do you want to take that one, Director? Or?
I can probably take a shot at it through the chair.
Whichever.
Go ahead, Mary.
Well, part of this whole thing is to, the providers are obligated to contact interested parties, which would be neighbors. And in the case, I wonder if we could incorporate an informal tribal consult in our neighborhood outreach plan as part of that.
What
If
you would
I
get
could
is
jump on that.
a typical concurrence from each of the tribes if you're in their area.
Well, I think the question is that if there's no real ground disturbance going on, is there a need for concurrence? And normally, when we're going through a ministerial process, there's not a referral process. That's something that people would come in and demonstrate that they're in compliance, and they would then be able to get the clearance. I think that that's something we're still struggling with even tonight. We got the comments from DEH or DHHS looking for a referral process. But the balance here is that if there's a referral process, it's just going to make it more complicated to issue these permits. And so if there's no ground disturbance and it's on a lot, paved is clear, but if it's gravelled, there's no grading going on, there's no earth moving going on, I wonder, maybe we should have a discussion with the tribes before we get to a place where we're taking this forward for a final action. But I wonder if the tribes would want then to participate in that if there's no earth disturbance.
You would have to ask the TIPOs,
Right.
especially, I mean, Eureka. I mean, there's a lot of places that you wouldn't think that they're sacred, but they are.
Understood.
Go ahead, Thomas.
So, I heard a lot of comments of people questioning the 10, starting off 10, but I would really like to remind everyone it's a pilot thing. So let's say it doesn't work out and in 18 months we have to withdraw it. I think if there's only 10 sites, let's make sure it works well so that way we aren't in potentially losing a bunch more. I also would assume it's an ordinance, so if we get 12 months down the road and it's working really good, it could probably be amended as well. But I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. Is, I'm in favor of the 10, and I'd like to see definitions around the church, that alternative too.
All right. Noah, you have a comment?
Okay, well, I guess I have a somewhat different view, but it is a view that is echoing what some of the public commenters said. My view is that given that this is a pilot project, given that it is time limited to 18 months, or even if we were to expand that to 2 years, which I think would be reasonable, I think we ought to remove, or we ought to lower the barriers to entry as much as possible so that we could get more examples of this happening on the ground, even at the risk of some of them occurring in places or in ways that do cause some impacts or problems, so that we can learn from this experience and perhaps put more limitations in place later. I mean, I guess to take 3 or 4 examples of limitations that I think are questionable, I mean, we've discussed the church thing already, but for my money, I would like to see any church as being an allowed site, and I think it's sort of weird and awkward to have the planning staff be verifying that the current congregation is 20 people or more. I just feel like if it's a church, let's let it be used. But conceivably allowing it in other zoning areas, I would at least like to have a discussion of whether there might be other zones that could be appropriate. Removing the limitation on only 20 sites, because, well, the other point is that each of these plans, each of these projects is going to have a management plan that will define the project more precisely. So 20 sites may be a reasonable limit for many of these sites, but not necessarily all. So I just feel like, why have it be limited to 20 sites? And I mean individual sites within the site, not 10 sites in the whole county. And finally, the requirement that it be not allowed for overnight, or sorry, that it be limited to overnight only and not allowed for 24 hours seems problematic to me as well. And that was something that was reflected by some of the comments that I read. So in short, I guess what I'm saying is I would really like us, for the purposes of this pilot project, to lower the restrictions as much as possible, see what happens, and see if we have to add in some of those restrictions afterwards. Thank you.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Levy. I agree with a lot of that in terms of collection of data. It's important to have a good interval where we can actually learn from the experience. I still would like to limit the churches to the zones that are currently listed, just to avoid having them in places where we may not be able to access the site. Wildlife reasons, water quality, all of the same reasons that we talk about in terms of other projects, in fact. And so I just want to add that. Thanks.
Any other thoughts? I have one. I agree with just about everything that's been said. My only suggestion would be that we don't do it for as long as what's being asked, the 18 months. I think we should do it for 6 months. That gets us through the winter, which is generally what the big concern is. And we'll know if things need to be changed sooner. I think if we let it go on too long, things, even if they're not working, are going to get established in certain areas or in certain places, and then we're going to be locked into them, where I think if we do it for a shorter duration, we're going to find out if it works or it doesn't, if it works in that neighborhood, if it works in this one, if the program in general works. So I think a shorter duration, for the first go-around at least, would be better. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I too am in favor of this. I'm looking at, though, I like alternative one, which limits it to 18 months, but with the discretion of the supervisors to extend it for a length of time, seeing it going. When you put something for like only 6 months, it's hard to get funding and get that all set up, is the problem on that, Alan. It's very hard because these are going to be managed sites, and they're going to be limited to 20 at each site. 20 vehicles, tents, sleeping cabins. With those 3 different management plans, it's going to take a little setup. So we're not going to be seeing this for just emergency shelters for winter. We're looking at doing this right now in the summertime once it gets set up, and it would be good to go ahead and go with the 18 months. I believe, in my mind, I think this has been vetted very well. A lot of input was put here. We'll give it a shot, and I would like alternative 1 with the limit of 18 months, unless it's extended.
Okay, any other thoughts?
If we did 18 months, I mean, I've been presuming that it's 18 months because we would get a data collection of 12 months, presuming that it would probably take 6 months to really see these sites developed. But I just have a question in terms of the timeline, I guess. If this were approved, could these be in place like tomorrow?
So once the ordinance is effective, which will be 30 days after the Board of Supervisors action, yeah, they could be in place within a week.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm personally okay with the 18 months. I still think that the tribal consultation issue needs to be addressed because one of the tribes reached out to us expressing that as a concern. And I'd like to know what the others think. I think that's appropriate, especially in areas, where there are sacred sites. In addition to that, I really think that whatever the cap is, be it 10, 20, 15, that we have a maximum per community planning area or maximum per something so that it's not concentrated in just 1 or 2 communities.
Thomas? So just for clarification, I guess I might have been looking at this differently. Alternative 1, if we went with alternative 1, that would not include any church sites. Is that correct or incorrect?
They're unrelated to each other, the 2 alternatives.
They're unrelated?
They're both just an alternative to what's otherwise to the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not 1 or 2. It's
Okay.
1 or not and 2 or not.
Okay. So if we approved 1, it would, like, church sites wouldn't be able, unless they went to...
We have to make a separate determination.
Okay.
Too. Yeah.
All right. Well,
I just want to clarify something I said earlier. I'm not opposed to them being in churches. I just feel that if you're in a residential area, there should be some outreach to your neighbors to make sure everyone's good with this, because if it springs up tomorrow and you might have had some valid input that you want to provide, and I think as a homeowner, you should have that right to be able to have that input into any type of new facility that's coming to town that wasn't in the zone before.
I share your concerns.
I personally believe that if we look at the management plans, there is that outreach there. If we could have Michael or Mary in on that.
Yes, actually, I can answer that. Yeah, it's a requirement of the management plan that outreach in the neighborhood is done. So there is a different process. It's made by the provider. There's the sharing of the management plan is one. The bringing in the local authorities, like the sheriff has to be involved and know what's happening. So, and a chance for the neighbors to weigh in on their concerns. So all of those are part of the management plans.
And I was looking at the low barrier model first, I guess. That's page 52. Are the other ones in here? I was just able to open that up right there.
I believe that provision is in all of them, all 3 management plans.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing that Mary said earlier that I want to circle back to is she indicated that an appropriate approach to involving tribes could be as part of that outreach program that the provider takes steps to outreach to the applicable tribes rather than the planning department establishing a referral to the tribes. And that would shorten the time frame and minimize the bureaucracy involved with that sort of a referral.
I think that's an option, but I think that the county needs to make sure that those management plans adhere to all these rules and that they're, that the outreach was sufficient. So I don't know how you do that, but to just say, I mean, I can write a plan. I can write all kinds of plans, and that doesn't mean everything is okay. So someone, and I'm not saying that people are not reputable or that they would be dishonest or not, they just may not know how to go about doing it, because you're going to be dealing with different groups. Some groups are going to be better at it than others. Someone has to make sure that it happens, and that's where the county, I think, would come in.
If I could, through the chair, put a comment on that. It seems to me the neighbors would, have the ultimate say. If they complain, then
I think, Mary, if I could, the thing that's being articulated or as a concern is that if they reach out to the neighbors, and even if the neighbors are upset, there's no teeth to say that some change has to be made. And so I think the struggle here is there an ability to develop a set of regulations whereby there is the consultation with the neighborhood, that there is some kind of negotiation process or some kind of process whereby people feel like their voice and their concerns are at least heard. If I capture the concern correctly, I think that's what I'm hearing that you're looking for is that it be more than a token effort.
Well, we saw that at the roundabout in Arcata. People feel like they weren't heard, and they came back to the county, and then you have to deal with it later. So if we do it right from the beginning, then we won't have that problem.
And just to add, I know you said you don't want a referral process, but the disposal of Blackwater, really seems like it has to have some agency who deals with that regularly, have either very specific rules that can be followed or the ability to sign off. That just seems like common sense to me.
Noah?
I wanted to ask about, and hopefully get a little clarity about one concern that I mentioned, which was the prohibition against 24-hour access. But I want to go back to Mary's presentation, because I believe in her presentation she showed the 3 models being minimum requirements, village model, or low barrier had, I think if I recall correctly, under village model and low barrier, it said 24 hours could be allowed if the management plan permitted it, and it was only minimum requirements that said overnight access only. So first of all, is that correct? Okay. And I mean, I guess my general point or my question is, why not allow the duration of time, as in overnight or 24-hour access, be determined on a case-by-case basis according to the site, the capacity of the operator, and so forth? Why limit certain categories of these sites to being overnight only? Can you explain the reasons for that? Because maybe there is a reason that I'm not understanding. But it was something that, again, I got from a couple of the comments. People were saying these need to not be limited to overnight only. So I would appreciate some clarity.
yeah, I can take that through the chair. requirement for overnight only is really to accommodate the need to eliminate for a provider who has limited funds and an appropriate site. In other words, it'll take less staffing, it will be less expensive. That's really the only reason for.
But if I may jump in, why make that a requirement of the ordinance? Why not allow them to limit it to overnight only if they should prefer, but allow them to make it 24 hours if they do have the capacity and wish to do so? We wouldn't be requiring that each of these have 24-hour access if we just allowed them to do that in their management plan if they wish to. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And actually, there is no reason that couldn't be in there. It could be a choice. There's no requirement. There's no logical reason why, other than the cost, that it couldn't be the choice of the provider.
Okay, thanks for that response.
All right. Chair, if I could, Mary, would you explain how the different options work? I mean, isn't it also within the ordinance that somebody could come up with their own operations plan and submit that? So just what Commissioner Levy is asking could be something that somebody proposes?
Yes. In fact, the way we built the management plans, for clarity and ease for the providers, we included everything that's required by the ordinance. And in addition, we have best practices with choices so that there are multiple places in there where, there's choice A, B, and C or other. And there's no legal reason why a provider can't scrap our plans, honestly, and come up with their own. As long as as long as they have our ordinance covered. The thought is, because we're a rural community and that kind of thing only happens when you have kind of a lot of resources, a lot of staff resources, where the management plans are basically a pre-made framework to make it easier for people, but they're not a legal document that can't be varied from. Does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah. I guess I just want to say my overarching concern is that we try to allow the maximum flexibility in the ordinance for different types of plans to come forward according to the individual needs and capacities of the project applicants. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I would think that the overnight versus 24, 7 time means that they've got to have things more in place. They've got to have sanitation because people will be staying there the whole time, as opposed to the low barrier, minimal just getting in and having management during that overnight stay makes it less expensive to start off. I would see that there could be a possibility of expanding once that kind of gets started with possibly one of the providers that, hey, they then see it's working and they're doing good, and maybe they've got some more money coming in to do that more, and they could then advance their management model with more things to have people on site than 24/7.
You also might have other uses during the day for that parking lot.
And that could be, yeah,
And,
that other side.
It doesn't jive with, at night it doesn't really matter.
I think the clarification Commissioner Levy was seeking was just that those were suggested models and not hard and fast guidelines or regulations associated with each model.
That would be my preference. Yeah, thanks.
All right.